Congressman Royce, I come to you now because give me your assessment of this and having put in context what has been said earlier.
Well, Charlie, one point I would make is that the Pentagon, you saw Secretary of Defense Ash Carter express some real concerns last week. It wasn't understood until the very end of this process, as David has explained, that all of a sudden this issue of lifting the arms embargo, which also means lifting the embargo long-term on the ICBM program that Iran maintains, as General Carter said, you know, the I stands for intercontinental ballistic missile, and that means it can fly from Iran to the United States. And the fact that Russia weighed in at the 11th hour to support Iran so that Russia in the future, 8 years from now, can transfer technology, help give their assistance in, and they'll be paid handsomely for it, but give their assistance for developing an ICBM capability, that could be a real threat to the U.S. homeland. This is one of the things that the Pentagon obviously has raised as an issue. The other big issue is that we thought at the outset that this was going to be 24-hour inspections, you know, maybe the right to go anywhere, anytime. And now we find it's going to be 24 days, and then we get into an adjudication process in which we have to ask permission of Iran and then probably work with China and Russia to really have that access. This is what undercut us on the nuclear agreement we had with North Korea, this inspection issue or lack of ability to really inspect. And this would be a concern, I think, that we're raising at this point as we try to get into the details of this process.
But because of the president and the way the veto was written, does that enhance the president's chances of getting this?
I'm not sure. It's going to depend. Remember, we had 367 members of Congress, that's 84% of the members in the House, write or co-write a letter to the president. And that letter asked that 4 things be achieved in this agreement. The right to go anywhere, anytime on the inspections, and that they be instantaneous. The fact that we lift the sanctions at the end of the agreement rather than the beginning. That it be multiple decades rather than 10 years. And that the IAEA have their 12 questions answered when it comes to the previous bomb work, for which they have 1,000 pages of documents that they insist show that Iran has cheated in the past and worked on that program. They need that as the baseline. So we will get the copy of this agreement, the 180 pages. They're in the process of sending that over from the administration. But the fact that 84% of the House signed on to that letter, and the fact that those 4 issues were not met in the agreement, I think do raise concerns for the Congress.
Kareem, what do you say to that?
I think, Charlie, as a country, we're very internally conflicted about this deal. On one hand, after a decade and a half in Iraq and Afghanistan, everyone really wanted to resolve this issue peacefully and diplomatically. On the other hand, I think there remains tremendous skepticism about the Iranian regime and its fidelity to this deal. I know a lot of people, including Henry Kissinger, believe that Iran is compromising as a result of the sanctions. And if we remove those sanctions a year or 2 from now, will they remain faithful to the deal? So I think that, you know, it's a conflicting moment for the United States, but I do believe that you have to look at it in the context of where we are as a country. After a decade and a half of conflicts in the Middle East, I think President Obama has had a mandate to both avert an Iranian bomb and avert bombing Iran.
Well, as you know, the president argues he couldn't hold the sanctions together.
I think that's probably right. At the same time, the way these sanctions are set up, it basically forces companies and countries around the world to make a simple choice, and that is, do you want to do business with the United States or do you want to do business with Iran? And for the vast majority of companies and countries, that's a pretty easy choice. But it was also, I think, the robustness, the success of the sanctions regime, I think, was due to the fact that people saw how President Obama and Secretary Kerry had made these unprecedented overtures to Tehran, which Iran under the presidency of Mahmoud Ahmadinejad hadn't reciprocated. So I think that, if it looked like the United States was being unreasonable, intransigent, and not willing to engage in diplomacy, I think it's probably right that countries like China and Russia would have peeled off from the sanctions.
Congressman Royce, does the president have an argument when he says, look, the alternative is worse and more likely that they will get the bomb, or somebody will have to bomb them?
I understand the argument the president made there. But remember, this is an administration which opposed our attempt to impose these sanctions on Iran in the first place, arguing they would not be successful. When the sanctions were imposed, and frankly were imploding gradually the economy in Iran, at this point the storyline changed. And the bipartisan legislation that I and Elliot Engel had prepared in the last session, where we passed it out 400 to 20, working with Treasury in the past, with Treasury officials, we had put together legislation that would really give the Ayatollah a choice between economic collapse or compromise on his nuclear program. The point I would make is that the administration decided to have Senator Reid hold that and not bring that up on the Senate floor, even when we had overwhelming support in the Senate. We went into this negotiation without that additional leverage, and I would just observe at this point that we're coming out of this negotiation with real concerns from the Pentagon and certainly from those who have looked at the past practice. As one of the experts said, it's in the Iranian DNA to cheat, and now they've been able to put in place a whole series of processes which will take us, 24 days to get through, and then an adjudication process which could take us months in cases where they are accused of cheating or moving equipment around and doing testing.
A huge issue in Republican-Democratic politics, you think?
I think a lot depends upon our examination over the next 60 days and the conclusions we reach. But I will say one thing, and that is the conduct of the Iranian regime itself could become an issue. For example, this weekend we had the annual Quds Day parade, and there you saw Rouhani marching in the parade itself. And when he was interviewed as the crowd behind him were chanting "Death to America," and the placards translated that were being carried translated to "Death to Israel." And in the middle of this interview, he says, well, the future looks very bright in terms of this negotiation. The question is, will this negotiation really change the conduct of that regime? And a lot of this, what we see in the ensuing weeks and months as Iran is emboldened, the question is going to be, what does that encourage them to do with respect to their agitation against Israel? As they call for death to Israel and they transfer 100,000 precision guidance systems, this is the latest news, into the hands of Hezbollah. Will they give Hezbollah an order to fire those? This would be the reason why the Prime Minister of Israel would be distraught, and increasingly it's one of the reasons why I think Ash Carter, the Secretary of Defense, is beginning to show concern about this comment on the part of Iran that they want to mass-produce ICBMs.
Congressman Royce, last quick question for you. If this works, it's a historic agreement?
Yes, if it works, it's a historic agreement.
And if it fails?
But so was the North Korean Framework Agreement. That was historic, and yet it failed, and the same individuals who worked on that agreement, Wendy Sherman, I remember some of our debates at the time. I was on the committee, and I remember the views of John Kerry at that time. And it turned out they were wrong, and it turned out that North Korea obtained a nuclear weapon as a result. So there's a lot consequential about this, and that's what Congress is going to have to look into.
Well, I'll be here. I can't wait. All of this is intriguing to me.